Welcome, friends, to an unusual and fascinating webinar, Behind the Scenes at the Archives. I am Mark Bowman, Executive Director of the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network, the host of today's program. LGBTQ-RAN is a unique venture dedicated to preserving the history of LGBTQ religious movements around the world. LGBTQ-RAN is a digital enterprise. We are not a physical repository that stores papers. We advise and support leaders and groups in their efforts to preserve their records in appropriate archives. Furthermore, we collect and provide a treasure of historical information on our website about LGBTQ persons and groups from a wide array of religious expressions around the world. And finally, we encourage research and scholarship in queer religious history. Have you ever wondered, what is an archive? What does it look like? How is it used? Today, you're in for a special treat as LGBTQ-RAN Archivist Doris Malkmus will guide you on a behind-the-scenes tour of two archives. We will explore the Tretter Collection of GLBT studies at the University of Minnesota. We'll also get a look at a more traditional Wisconsin Historical Society library. Many of you know Doris Malkmus from her longtime work with LGBTQ-RAN. Doris earned a PhD in history at the University of Iowa and an MS in archival science from the University of Michigan. She also conducted oral history projects at the Iowa Women's Archive and the Sisters of Loretto in Kentucky. She retired after many years as the archivist at Penn State. Doris initially served as LGBTQ-RAN archivist and oral historian from 2002 to 2005, and then returned to our team in 2017 in order to fulfill her passion for helping individuals contribute their personal narratives to a broader social history. Doris will be joined by Tretter Collection Curator Aidan Bettine, an archivist and public historian who researches and teaches local history pertaining to race, gender, and sexuality in the Midwest. Aidan holds master's degrees in both library and information science and critical ethnic studies. He is completing an interdisciplinary PhD in public history and archival science at the University of Iowa. Prior to becoming the curator of the Tretter Collection in August of 2022, he founded the LGBTQ Iowa Archives and Library, a community archives and lending library in Iowa City, Iowa. He also served as community and student life archivist at the University of Iowa. Now, to those of you watching this webinar, we welcome your comments or questions. I see you've all been introducing yourself. Great. Welcome your comments or questions in the chat box of the Q&A function. The presenters will respond to those during the Q&A time toward the end of today's program. If you would like to offer personal greetings or comments to the presenters, stay on after the webinar is concluded, and you will be invited into the Zoom room with them. Please direct any technical concerns to Isaiah Poole, who is the tech manager for this program. One special note before we begin, you will hear a lot about the Brethren Mennonite Council for LGBT interests in this webinar. BMC is offering a follow-up conversation to this webinar entitled Queering Our Anabaptist Archive this afternoon at 2:15 p.m. Central, 3:15 Eastern. On the screen, you should see the link to sign up for that webinar also. And now, I am pleased to welcome Doris Malkmus to guide you on this archival tour.
Hello, everyone. I am so delighted to be here at the Tretter LGBTQ Collection at the University of Minnesota. Aidan Bettine, its curator, and I are going to give you a behind-the-scenes look at what happens when organizations and individuals donate their historical records to an archive. Well, for those of you who really have just a scanty knowledge about what archives do and where they are, you might think in the big picture about the National Archive in Washington, D.C., which saves all of the government records. I had a little echo there. But there are many smaller archives all over the country. You'll probably think of historical societies and university archives. Every corporation and sometimes hospitals will have an archive of their own to save their history. But some archives, like the Tretter, were created by the community with the conscious intention of saving their own history. Aidan, I would love it if you'd be willing to start us off by telling us about community archives.
Hello. Thank you, Doris. I really appreciate it. And Mark, thank you for the introduction. I'm so excited to be here with all of you today to chat archives and, of course, LGBTQ archives more specifically. So I'm currently standing in the Tretter Collection, which you can see based on some of the ephemera behind me, like the townhouse sign from a gay bar in St. Paul, Minnesota, that no longer exists. But in terms of the history of community archives and the way that a collection like the Tretter Collection developed, we really do have to go back to gay liberation and to the 1970s, which I'm thankful BMC, of course, has its origins in 1976 during this era. And what most people, including Gene Tretter, our namesake and founder of the collection, who I'll talk a little bit more about in just a minute, will certainly attest to, is the fact that institutional collections, archives at universities, governmental archives, like examples Doris has already named, pretty much outright refused to collect LGBTQ material in the 1970s, 80s, and even onward. Part of that was questioning the historical value of LGBTQ history. Part of that was also scrutinizing some of the materials that I think we all know and understand tell narratives about our lives and the organizations and different protests and movement pieces we've been a part of, right? The ephemera, like the townhouse sign behind me, or T-shirts and textiles and protest banners, buttons that you get at a Pride Fest or at any type of rally or parade. Institutional collections really devalued queer history and didn't see the merit in collecting it. And so in the 1970s, a lot of community members took it upon themselves to either build personal collections, often apartment archives in their own homes, in their basements, etc., or community archives that were more public-facing, maybe eventually became a nonprofit organization, and many of those still stand today from the 70s and 80s. To name a few, just to give a shout out, we certainly have the Gerber Hart Library and Archives in Chicago, Illinois, the Lesbian Herstory Archives in Brooklyn, New York, the One National Gay and Lesbian Archives, which is now housed at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, the GLBT Historical Society in San Francisco, and the Archives, or what is historically known as the Canadian Gay and Lesbian Archives in Toronto. These are fantastic examples of collections that still stand today that grew out of the gay liberation movement and people recognizing that it was LGBTQ visibility, both in the present moment and historically, that really was the thing to collect in the social movement. How do we find ourselves? How do we find ourselves and see ourselves reflected in print culture, in ephemeral material? And then how do we capture the moment, right? If we think of the 1970s and 80s from gay liberation to the AIDS epidemic as this really prolific entrance of queer life into the public in some ways, but also into community, somebody had to document it. And the institutions ultimately weren't. And so we have all these community archives proliferate. Tretter is certainly a hybrid in some ways. We started in the community, started as a private collection grown by Nicholas Tretter right here in the Twin Cities. And he collected from around the world, not just around the country. Part of that is due to his own love of languages. He had been a linguist in the Navy when he served in the late 1960s to early 1970s. But he began collecting anything remotely LGBTQ because he was told by the anthropology department here at the University of Minnesota, where he was originally a student, that there was nothing to study about, quote, homosexual culture. And so he used that as maybe his spark or the moment that he wanted to start building an archive. That's where his impulse originated. And he began collecting anything he possibly could. That proves that we've existed as a community, that documents our history, and that is certainly shareable with community members in the public, right? In the late 90s and into the 2000s, Gene's collection actually moved into the university here where I stand, in part because of really good local advocacy and activism. And I'm so excited that a collection like Tretter was able to move into the U, just because we do have some more affordances like access to a salary for my position and some of the resources here that you'll see in some of the clips that Doris and I pre-filmed for you, because we have no internet downstairs where we store our material. But it also is complicated for the Tretter Collection as an LGBTQ collection to be inside of an institution. We're the only institution in the Midwest with a full-time LGBTQ archivist. I'll let that sink in just for a moment. We're the only ones. I have a colleague who does part-time queer archiving down at the Gay and Lesbian Archives of Middle America in Kansas City, GLAMA, and of course the community-run Gerber Hart Library and Archives. But not many institutions have chosen to invest in LGBTQ history the way that the University of Minnesota has been able to, because of Gene Tretter and his collecting, and showing how important this work is and why we need materials like this in the university. And so we bridge kind of a research institutional archive with a community-oriented archive in the work that we do. We're certainly open and welcoming all the time academic researchers who are doing what you might all traditionally think of as archival work and research, right? Scholarship, books, journal articles, maybe some public history projects or digital projects in our current age. But we also serve and focus on the community, coming in to use the collection, to see the collection. People often come in just to read zines, LGBTQ zines from the 1980s and 90s, and sit in our reading room and have a great time engaging and actually interacting with our history and being able to hold and touch the material that, you know, queer elders before us have made. But then I also have a higher expectation in terms of outreach and the way that we engage the community, which I'll certainly talk about a little bit more in this webinar as we move forward. But it is a really beautiful thing to have a collection like this that is so well supported. And I'm so excited to talk about and welcome in the BMC archives into the Tretter Collection, and think more specifically about what it means to represent queer spiritual life, not just in the Midwest, obviously, but around the country, in a collection that is nestled here in the heartland, where I think so many people have obviously a broad range of experiences with their faith and spirituality and their queerness, but that I think other collections sometimes shy away from meeting that intersection, right? So I'm glad we can do it here in the Tretter Collection. But we'll show you a bit more about that, and I'm going to pass it off to Doris.
Well, Aidan and I wanted to have the experience of the archive start with the people who created the collections and their work to get their historical records into an archive. And so we asked the leaders of the Brethren Mennonite Council for LGBTQ Interest to share their experience on what it was like for them to donate their historical records to an archive. And they obliged us with sending us a video explaining their process before their records got here.
Greetings, my name is Annabeth Reshley, and I'm the Executive Director of BMC, the Brethren Mennonite Council for LGBT Interests. BMC is a nearly 50-year-old organization whose mission is to care for LGBTQ Mennonites and brethren and to transform harmful church structures.
And I'm Haris Martinez, BMC's board chair.
Today, Doris Malkmus asked us to talk with you about our recent archival donation to the Tretter Collection, and specifically about the work that went into preparing and transferring BMC's materials.
Our process started in August of 2022 when we moved our long-term Minneapolis office to Chicago. And then we realized we had about 20 years of archival materials in a third floor attic that had not been donated to the denominational archive that our predecessors had worked with.
And while that amount of material was overwhelming, it was also a gift to have this amount of material saved over all of these years. And it was clear early on to us that we really wanted to care for this material and make it widely accessible to our community. And it was around this time that we reached out to LGBTQ-RAN for support as we discerned our next steps. It was really important to us to not just find a place to put our stuff, but to really find a permanent archival home that aligns with our values. So in our discernment, we called in the rest of the BMC board. We called in LGBTQ religious organizations for guidance and support. And ultimately, the BMC board and staff decided that the Tretter Collection is where we wanted BMC's materials to live.
We carried out an archives inventory in Minneapolis in November of last year with Doris. And then we requested the removal of the rest of BMC's archive from a denominational archive.
Then in April of this year, we took off on an epic road trip where we picked up that material from the denomination's archive in Elgin, Illinois, drove to Minneapolis, packed up our material from the third floor attic, and then drove our entire collection together to Tretter at the University of Minnesota. And we officially donated BMC's archive on May 1st, which was serendipitously May Day. Then after donating our material, we got to spend a day or so working with Aidan Bettine to create an agreement for future users and how they would access the archive. And throughout this, we really appreciated Aidan's sensitivity to the unique concerns of our LGBTQ community.
Annabeth and I have been heading this archival project for the last 2 years on behalf of our organization, and it's so exciting for both of us to bring this phase of the project to a close and begin to invite other people in our community to participate in this archival process with us.
And as I have been saying, one of the things that we have really come to believe through this is that queer and trans archival work is liberatory work. It deeply impacts how we show up for justice and liberation today. And we will be sharing more about that aspect of our process at BMC's Talkback immediately following this webinar at 2:15 Central Time today on Zoom.
And speaking of showing up for justice and liberation, we really want to thank LGBTQ-RAN for showing up for us.
Well, I just love working with Annabeth and Haris. And I think they made a really fine point about LGBTQ archives specifically being liberatory. They mentioned that they originally had donated their records to the denominational archive, and some denominations have gone a long way to make LGBTQ history within their tradition an important part of their denominational history. So I don't want to take away from that. On the other hand, I think what we'd like to do is continue. You have a pretty good idea now about what happened to the collection before it arrived at the archive, but now you're in for a treat because we're going to show you what happened after the BMC collection arrived at the Tretter. And as Aidan said, the Tretter loading dock is 7 stories below ground level and doesn't have Zoom. So Aidan and I created a video of the collection in the Tretter receiving dock. Here we are in the loading or receiving dock of the Anderson Library. And Aidan is going to show us a little bit about what collections look like when they come in the door.
Really excited to show you the behind the scenes, especially for a larger collection like the BMC records. It actually came in and loaded up onto 2 pallets. And you'll see things come in, U-Haul boxes, office boxes, bankers boxes, different tubes and sizes. And we really sift through all the material down here and up in our office, as you saw, to see what we've received. But luckily, the BMC is full of ephemeral material, t-shirts like this, which we're so happy to have in the collection. We actually have over 1,000 textiles, particularly t-shirts, in the Tretter collection because of the ways that LGBTQ folks have continually produced organizational and protest textiles, you could say. We also want to showcase some of the material that has come in from a personal donation related to BMC. So these binders here were put together by Frank Trinka, a local BMC member here in Minneapolis.
What's the title on that?
The title on this one is Annoying the Pharisees, 1989. And each of these binders is really an amazing and really one-of-a-kind record of BMC activity throughout each year, organized chronologically in months. You see flyers, letters, speeches, newsletters, different newspaper clippings.
Did he indicate what's in each pocket?
Yeah, the list that you probably can't read on the front of each pocket says what's included and what date it was released. They're all in chronological order of
That's got to be a collector
decades.
after our own heart.
Oh, absolutely. It's collections like this that really give the archives even more of a personal touch or voice that really pairs well with these organizational records with the BMC. So we're very thankful to Frank.
That is amazing. What a wonderful find.
Absolutely.
And what about these computer towers?
Yeah, so we're lucky to have a digital archivist, and these computer towers will go to her next, and we'll see what she can scrape off to save in terms of digital records of BMC.
And there's more to the collection. These boxes look a lot more put together than the ones that came in the door.
Yeah, so these boxes are the ones that have already been processed as we're moving through the collection. So you can see everything is folded. It's nice and snug in the box so that no paper is getting bent or crinkled. And you can really see part of the BMC life. This box is from the 1999 and the early 2000s. So we have folders on Welcome Our Witness in 2000, Stop the Hate in 1999 and 2000, different BMC convention materials from 99, along with the Millennium March on Washington in 2000 and probably the BMC's participation.
It looks to me like they have many folders with just a couple of items in it, but that means that every folder title would help someone find exactly what they were interested in on the finding aid.
Exactly. It's really great to give researchers, community members a very deep lens into a collection, so they have a sense of both what they can find, but for a collection like BMC that we're guessing will be around 60 boxes, no one has to search through all 60 to find the records they're looking for or a particular historical moment. So this really helps.
This is amazing. Thank you so much for this.
So I want to take this time to show you all a little bit more about archival processing and maybe how donations come into the collection and what we do and what they look like from there. I'm going to zoom in. Thank you. So I have a few collections pulled for us here, or a few donations pulled, I should say. They aren't even quite collections yet. One includes the Vivian Vance Memorial Card Collective, which is a social group and friend group here in the Twin Cities. That has been, I think they started in the late 1970s and they've been friends ever since. And so you can see we have a beautiful scrapbook full of photographs, newspaper clippings, letters, much like Frank's binders. This is an already very organized donation from from a donor, from a social group. That's not, oh, sorry, that is not always true, that materials are so well sorted. And you certainly, I want to make it clear, you do not have to sort your materials to donate them to a collection. That is certainly something that we do as archivists to support housing, describing, caring for a collection specifically. But I wanted to show you the scrapbook since it just came in, along with a few more Vivian Vance materials, like a mug from the friend group, from the social group, a deck of playing cards. So this is the type of ephemeral material that I was speaking about earlier that other collections may have seen as something to devalue, to not collect, to refuse to bring into their collection over prioritizing the paper. We also have a sweatshirt here. Let's see. They chose Vivian Vance as their, oh, sorry, there we go. They chose Vivian Vance as their namesake, right? I don't want to say mascot. Namesake, because she was a good friend and the underdog. So a little history there, along with a few t-shirts where we can see that same different shots from I Love Lucy with Vivian Vance on screen are here. So that's an example of a collection coming in. I also want to show from the same donor, we got a different section of materials about Out in the Valley. And we have here a run of their newsletters. So these have been both printed and digitized for us. They currently are in this binder that you can see doesn't really move that well because they're quite thick, too much paper. And so this is something that when we're ready to process it, we will remove the paper from this binder, which it's already doing for us, and then organize everything in order, which it already seems to be chronologically, for example, and put them in folders and label them so people know what we have and that we have a run of Out in the Valley newsletters. So things come in binders, they come in boxes. And one of the other things I desperately want to highlight is the fact that we also have countless buttons in the Tretter collection. Now, these buttons happen to be on plaques from Twin Cities Pride specifically, but we have plenty of loose buttons that end up in the collection, and we store them either on theme, so by event, by cause, by protest, or even symbolism. We have a few boxes with either pink triangles or the lambda symbol, right? We organize around kind of our cultural history and understanding, or by organizations and individuals. So if you had a set of buttons that you wore on a t-shirt to a protest, you could certainly donate that set of buttons and we would save it with your name on it for other people to see and view. They might also go into an exhibit or some kind of display, but we also have this lovely Out in the Valley crop top that came in with this donation as well. So here's a little bit more of the raw behind the scenes. How do collection materials come in our extra cardboard boxes, a lot of wine boxes and whatnot. And then we do the good work of sorting the material, describing the material, and then it ends up looking like what you saw in the video on the dock, of the very organized box with all the label folders. And we provide what we call a finding aid as a guide for people to navigate each collection and what we have in it. So people will actually know what textiles do we have, what buttons do we have, newsletters, etc. One of the other things while we're on camera in this sense that I want to show you is that we also care about archival materials traveling really the world if I can, but traveling the Midwest, traveling the region, and ideally traveling nationally so that people know our history. Now, we can't always do that in the way that I literally send a t-shirt abroad or send a t-shirt to a neighbor to put on display. But we have these really fantastic pop-up exhibits that you'll see later as well that we store over here. Sorry. Store over here as a traveling exhibit. Doris wanted me to shout out some of our outreach work. And I think it's very important to demonstrate. So we've done the work of writing about our history. Sorry, I'll come back by my sound. We have done the work of writing about our history, researching our history, and using collection materials to be able to display it for everyone, for example. So one of the critical components of our archival work, sorry about the swipey sound, is not just housing things and displaying things in our library, but actually moving our history into the community outside of the academic context. So for example, this is one of the panels on the Iron Range, all about how people built community north of us in Minnesota. That's going to travel with me this weekend to the North Star Gay Rodeo Association rodeo up in Hugo, Minnesota. So we'll have a few panels on display from our collection. I'm going to wind this down so it doesn't move. But one of the reasons we store things here in this library, and one of the things I really appreciate about the Tretter Collection being housed here at the University of Minnesota, is the preservation system downstairs. So although we can't walk you down and have you feel how cold it gets in the basement together on camera, one of the really beautiful things is that the caverns below us run at 50% humidity. There's no humidity fluctuations, which can be very damaging of materials. And we also have preservation in terms of our actual temperature and air control. So we use the ambient temperature underground to preserve all of our materials below 70 degrees, usually around 67 to 68 degrees. That helps us avoid mold, that helps us avoid rust. And of course, that does allow a certain type of security and safety for the materials in the long run as they're stored downstairs in the caverns versus up in a slightly more hot library. Above ground, that is a little bit more humid. So that's one of the beautiful things about being able to move collections from this very kind of raw, unprocessed, freshly donated material into this very busy suite, as you can see, with plenty of materials that we're currently sorting and trying to rehouse. And then we pull them downstairs once they're described and available for community members and researchers alike to experience. So I will pause there on this camera and jump back after we have another short video of some more of our storage downstairs. Thank you. Welcome to the caverns, where we store all the material in the Archives and Special Collections Department. Come take a peek with me in the stacks of the Tretter Collection. This is where we organize and store a lot of our archival materials. Each box has a specific location, so if you request to see it, we know where to find it on the shelf and bring it up to the reading room. We've already pulled some material for you to give you a sense of collection materials and the types of things we collect. This box from Out Front, Minnesota includes records like a phone log from 2001, a survey about bisexual community needs, and records from Out Front's statewide convenings in the early 2000s. We also have other sizes and shapes of material, including this box from Patrick Scully's papers that includes photographs from performances, dance performances, along with different flyers and artwork from his career.
I like the way that the oversized materials are nice and flat so they don't sag over the years.
Right. We don't want any curling. We want to ensure things are protected and saved at their actual size.
That's amazing. I just can't believe how much is down here.
More than any of us can fathom.
Well, I have to say that the whole process of taking in collections and making them safe and storing them and then having huge warehouses full of organized works, it just amazes me. And as you have seen, historical collections are not consciously organized by the donors. Archivists use very specific and time-tested principles and techniques to arrange the contents of collections. And we know that doing all that work would be meaningless if no one ever looked at these materials again. So after processing the collections, archivists create a finding guide that lists all of the folder topics in a collection and gives you some context as well. And that way, researchers can find materials. And you know for a fact you'd never be able to find anything if we had a general search term like church. But by time archivists process things and tag them and help people, they can really narrow in on things that they want. I'd also like to say that Aidan has a little bit more to say about outreach. And so we're going to switch back to his camera for a minute before proceeding to our researcher video.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add here a little bit better for sound versus the other camera is that I really define the work that I do in a community-oriented collection like Tretter as pro-touch archiving, which maybe isn't everyone's ideal or isn't the way we've even been trained sometimes to think about access and use. But I look to a lot of the community archives to find inspiration. And there's a really incredible archives of social movement protest art in New York City called the Interference Archive, which is all volunteer led. And I highly recommend if you find yourself in New York, in Brooklyn, go to visit. But they share my ethos and have a beautiful quote that if a poster corner gets bent or torn and a spine of a book gets cracked in terms of community use and being able to see the collections that were made by people themselves, that is well worth the risk to the material for people to be able to touch and hold and experience their history. And so that way of thinking has really informed what it means to run a collection like Tretter. And so on top of bringing panels that are 2D, that have a lot of digital, reproductions of material, one of the things I prioritize is traveling with archival material from the collection. Sometimes that is duplicates to definitely ensure we have safe preserved copies of local newspapers or T-shirts or other things like that. But sometimes it's not. And that's because I value people being able to interact with the material over storing it for an imagined future use by a researcher someday. And I think that's a big difference between a community collecting ethos and a kind of more traditional institutional ethos around archival use. Thanks, Doris.
And so I'd like to say that that's a community perspective. And we are now going to show you a more traditional perspective from the Wisconsin Historical Society, which has been one of the premier archives of American history since probably the last 150 years. And so we wanted to show you an updated version of someone going there to do some research about an LGBTQ topic. I'm here in front of the Wisconsin Historical Society. I'm going to meet my friend Michael Eldebrook, and we are going to look at a collection in the Wisconsin Historical Society archive. We're here at the Historical Society reading room for the archives. This is Michael Eldebrook, my friend, who's agreed, along with the Wisconsin Historical Society archivist Lee Grady, to let us record Michael's research in the archives. The important thing is, I think that we'll see, is how important it is for the archives to have organized information and let people know what they can find in an archive and help people find it while still preserving the security of all these priceless and unique materials.
Hello.
Hi.
How can I help you?
I was looking online and saw that Wisconsin passed some of the first gay rights legislation. I sort of hit a dead end, but I saw there was involvement with progressive churches, and the legislator who was leading the fight has his documents here in the Historical Society.
Sure, what was his name?
It's David Ballenclamp, something like that.
David Clarenbach by any chance?
Clarenbach, yeah. That's
Perfect.
right.
All right, so what we'll do is we'll head over to the computers over there. We'll get you registered to use the room. We'll put in the requests for those boxes that you need to see out of Clear and Box Papers, and then we'll go from there.
Awesome.
Perfect. All right, so now that you're registered with us, let's go to the catalog record for the Clarenbach papers. I'll show you the finding aid and how that works, and then we'll go from there.
Sounds good.
And that looks like us. Okay, so if you scroll back up a little bit, then if you click on Finding Aid Available Online, under Related Electronic Resources, the finding aid is where we're going to look at the list of boxes and folders within the collection, and then that's how we're going to figure out which boxes you need out of the collection. We don't allow pens in the reading room. We only allow pencils just to avoid getting indelible marks on valuable materials and that sort of thing. We also don't allow food or drink in the room. We don't allow bags or things, but any bags or coats you have with you, we'll give you a locker key to lock things up. But you can bring in anything you need for research, notebook and pencil, laptop, phone to take pictures with, all that good kind of stuff is fine. Great. Yeah. Cool. Lee, would you say for direction? That's north, right?
I would say normally, yeah.
Just bring it back up here.
That's the way they orient them, but, you know, since it's like land ownership.
Wearing gloves.
Nope, you don't need
Okay,
any gloves.
cool.
Usually what I do is I flip it over like this. And
Keep it on the flat.
yeah, keep it on the flat. And that
Sorry.
way everything, you can just flip it back over and it'll be in order.
So that's 18. No, it varies from year to year. This one
Well, you can see that archives aren't only storage facilities. They organize materials and they put finding aids online, and then they help researchers connect with the materials that they need. I know that Aidan has talked to us a little bit about outreach, and I know that he's done even more reaching out to festivals and things like that. And so when you think about donating your materials to an archive, you want to find one that has an approach that matches your organization's needs and mission. Do the administrators need to keep track of board minutes? Do you want your collection to continue to be liberatory? Or do you want them just to be nearby and at hand? Or do you need somebody who can make sure that your textiles are well cared for to last for a long time? So Aidan, would you like to add any more comments before we turn this over to Q&A?
Yeah, all I want to say after seeing that the full length of that lovely Wisconsin Historical Society visit is talk to your archivists, whether you're doing research or donating. We can be very helpful as you navigate our collections, right? Although I'm certainly not an expert of what's inside of every single box in the Tretter collection. I don't have enough lifetimes for that. I certainly know a lot of, as you saw, like the names of significant folks or people that are in the collection, not even quote unquote famous or significant, local LGBTQ folks, where I can help you, students, anyone navigate the collection, find the materials they're looking for. And I think a lot of people don't understand you can have that deeper relationship and conversation with an archivist, and let people know, what are you researching? What are you hoping to find? What are you excited about? What types of materials do you want to see? And we can really almost provide, it's almost like a concierge service, right, to our collections, and can really share that firsthand knowledge of what we have and what else might be of interest to you while you're visiting. So certainly don't be shy to talk to the archivists who are caring for the collections you want to look at or learn more about.
We're open to questions. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. We're looking forward to answering them. So I think I just want to re-emphasize what Aidan said, is that I was trained as a historian, and one of our first messages, and this is for academic research, is chat up the archivist. That's how you find out where the good stuff really is. There was a time when we didn't have so much online, and the only way to do it was to talk to other researchers and talk to historians who could say, oh, in that collection over there, there's some really good stuff about Alabama, or there's some really good stuff about, and it would be some small and arcane thing. So we just really want to encourage people. And I also want to encourage people as an outreach worker to say, don't skip the step of talking to the archivist in an area you think might be of interest to you. That person can guide your process before the boxes ever reach us. And don't be afraid to call LGBTQ-RAN, because we specialize in helping people build the buy-in from your whole organization before you donate things. We help people know they don't have to go out into their garage in 95-degree weather to sort everything over. And we can just help you find the archive that's right for you. So it says here, one of our questions is, do you ever, and this will be a good one for Aidan, do you ever not accept a donation of a collection? And then if that happens, do you give guidance to the donor for another place?
Great. And I selfishly have to say, Roland, if that's you from Chicago, say hello from Gerber Hart. I'd love to chat. But definitely, it's kind of rare that Tretter, it is you. Great. We're going to chat later. If Tretter in particular, to speak from my experience, so most collections, if not all archival collections, will have something that is called a collection development scope, or some kind of statement that's essentially a mission or statement of purpose of what do we collect and why. And that's always going to be the first place that we kind of refer to as archivists to say, does this collection meet our criteria? Is it what we collect, right? And for what's kind of the beautiful thing about a collection like Tretter, most of the time the question is it LGBTQ material? Yes or no? That's the first question. And if it is LGBTQ material, if it is queer and trans, there's a high chance we would say yes to bringing it into the collection. And one of the beautiful things is that we do have space to grow in those caverns. So I'm at a beautiful spot where I can say yes to a lot of collections, and that's becoming less and less so in the profession as we fill up our space. And someday, I'm sure, Tretter, we will hit that, but not right now. The other part with the Tretter collection, and to the specificities of your question, Roland, like if a donor is from a different locale, if they're not from the upper Midwest, if they're not from Minnesota, if someone is reaching out from further afield, I will usually ask, have you contacted your local queer archives? Or if someone was in Chicago, I'd say, have you reached out to Gerber Hart? And I regularly have that conversation with people to see if they've thought about keeping their queer history local to where it happened and to their lives. But also if people have different affiliations, right? If someone was an alum somewhere, have you thought about your university or college that you went to? Would you like to leave your papers there? Are they interested? And this is because I truly believe that as much queer material as we can should stay nearby to where it occurred, if we're able to achieve that, which we aren't always. So sometimes when the answer is, yes, I've already asked and they don't want it, no, I haven't asked, but I don't want to give it there, or let me go see and get back to you. Those are all really great responses. And I will navigate those at the end of the day to do what a donor wishes. What is their desire? Where do they want to be? Do they want to be a part of the Tretter collection? Odds are high we're happy to have them here. So it definitely is a nuanced conversation that looks a little bit different depending on the donor and the collection. And the only reasons that we wouldn't really say yes to material is, one, that it's not queer, and two, that we already have it. is often the bigger one. So if there's duplicates or quadruplicates of publications or t-shirts or other things, we're really going to question, do we need another copy of this, or is there a better home for it that we can send it to, and encourage someone to donate that direction. So that's the very broad answer. And the beautiful thing is having a very broad scope allows me to bring in a lot of material. And that is very much because of Jean Tretter's wishes to collect the breadth of LGBTQ history. And like I said at the beginning, have that awareness that many places won't. So it feels like we can kind of be one of the catch-alls to ensure that queer history is preserved. So I'll leave that long answer there, but I think it's a fascinating one.
We have another question, and it's from Jim Fusel, who's interested in doing some research with Quaker materials. And I guess a good place for me to put in a plug right here and now is that we try very hard to find all of the religious, LGBTQ religious collections in the country, and we put it on our website under collection catalog. And when you do that, you'll find that all of the Quaker Friends materials are tagged. So everything on our site is tagged. And I think the other best place to do it would be to follow researchers and the good old, follow the footnotes kind of stories, because I think as much as most of the Quaker LGBTQ concerns materials are at Swarthmore, there may be things that have appeared in newspapers and other things that never were part of those kind of institutional, records. So
Absolutely. I was going to chime in that where I would go first is definitely LGBTQ-RAN. And I've done it before to see what materials are there around the country. And I will shout out that in Tretter specifically, we have a range of publications on kind of queer Quaker life and other things, but also the papers of Ronald Matson, who was part of the Quaker community. So there's some local records here from Minneapolis.
Great. And then it looks here like someone said Brian Blackmore wrote a dissertation on Quaker history. It's at Temple University in Philly. So there might be quite a bit of, archival material you could find through the footnotes of that research. And I think we're just about wrapping it up.
I see one question about digitization.
I know I was ignoring
So
it.
I'll say the quick answer of we're slowly trying to digitize things, but you cannot digitize everything. That would be very impossible. So it's both in terms of labor and money, right? It would take probably more than all of our lifetimes combined in this room to digitize the entirety of the Tretter collection. And then the question becomes, great, we've digitized it. How do we access it? Right? That's kind of the second layer. And so we're always choosing strategically, what do we think is very culturally relevant in the current moment that we could potentially get a grant for to digitize and get some of that labor supported by different funds. And then also what do we think really captures our local history is sometimes the question at Tretter. And so the current projects that I have for digitization include all of our local Twin Cities LGBTQ newspapers. So it'll actually be word searchable in a database. And that'll be great for uncovering local history in a very national context as the news gets covered. But then we're also digitizing things that are often even more underrepresented in queer and trans history. So we're part of a grant with the Digital Trans Archive right now to digitize a bunch of BIPOC trans material, looking at Black and Indigenous folks of color and their history. And so we're digitizing a range of materials from our Two-Spirit related collections, including Richard LaFortune and Minnesota Men of Color records. So there's a little answer for that.
Very good. I think we'll turn it over here to Mark. And thank everybody, Aidan and the Tretter especially. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And amazing, Doris and Aidan. I was totally engrossed in this most fascinating webinar. I'm just pleased that to have learned and shared this with us. So thank you so much for being here. Thank all of you who are here, listen, watch, and ask questions. Within a few days, you will all receive an email with a link to a recording of today's program. Please share that with friends and colleagues. Help spread this word and news about archives and what they're like. If you're interested in more opportunities to explore the history of queer religious movements, check out the LGBTQ-RAN website, and particularly our events page. There you will find announcements of future online programs, as well as recordings of past presentations. LGBT-RAN's next program on Thursday, August 22nd, will explore our newest online exhibition on the Queer Spirit podcast. Curator Chris Stinson will interview the producers of this 2021-22 podcast series, Marvin Ellison and Tamara Torres McGovern, about how they shaped and recorded these in-depth interviews on queer spirituality in the state of Maine, and will walk you through this new online exhibit. You can sign up now to join this Zoom webinar. Again, it's on August 22nd. In closing, I remind you that LGBTQ-RAN is the first and foremost source of information on LGBTQ+ religious history. We are a very small operation that is funded through the generosity of friends like you. So if you would like to see more programs like this one, and if you share our commitment to ensure that future generations hear our voices and stories, please help make this happen. Scan the QR code, which you should see on the screen, or just type in giveq.org, giveq.org on your phone, tablet, or laptop. With your credit card in hand, it takes only a couple of minutes to make a gift, and your gift will make a difference. So on behalf of everyone here, I offer so much gratitude to Doris and Aidan for leading on this fascinating tour. Please have a good rest of the day.